This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Sannes and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberfire.com, as we are once again getting you set for Super Bowl 54 between the Chiefs and the 49ers today, talking with Dr. Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus. He is down in Miami. We're going to get his thoughts on this game and where he is leaning for the Chiefs and the 49ers. My name is Jim Sannes. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberfire.com, joined here as always by Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com and find Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank. Ed, Super Bowl coming up on Sunday. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Still looking forward to the game, just like yesterday.
There are some podcasts that do 5 podcasts in a week leading up to Super Bowl. I don't think I could do that, partly because by this time of year we're probably a little burned out, but also there's a lot.
I agree with that. I actually thought about breaking my Super Bowl preview up into like 4 or 5 little episodes. I decided not to, just because I felt like it flowed a little bit too well the way I had it into one thing. But, for me, like, during the regular season, I never get into one game quite this much. So It's fun to, dive into the personnel a little bit more. It's fun to think about some of these props in the game, stuff that just doesn't happen for any single regular season game. So it's just a little bit different of a process, and the people want to hear about it this week. So let's give them what they want.
And it's a lot slower process, which I think is a good thing, because you have more time to actually diagnose the individual matchups. We're going to talk about with Dr. Eric Eager in just a bit, but he is down in Miami as mentioned, and I think that's like a goal. Like, if I could, a bucket list thing. If I could sometime be at the Super Bowl, I don't care if it's there to talk at all. I just want to be around the atmosphere of the Super Bowl, because at other events, when you're around that fun energy,
right?
It's hard to parallel that. The only time I've been to anything close to that was a playoff game, a Minnesota Twins playoff game, back when I was in high school, middle school maybe. It was a game where Torrey Hunter overdove a ball in center field and the A's had an inside the park home run. It was a really bad game if you were a Twins fan, but just that energy and the atmosphere is so cool, and I think it's awesome that Eric's down there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the energy is really awesome, and just it's kind of like going to for me going to the Sloan every year, where you kind of have that energy of being around all the GMs and it's very cool.
And just a lot of football talk. That would also be a lot of fun. And this is our second Super Bowl podcast, I guess second and a half maybe. We did talk about with Whale Capper last week. Find him on Twitter at Whale_Capper to get his thoughts. A couple thoughts on Super Bowl 54. We had JJ Zacharyson of Number Fire and FanDuel on yesterday to break down some player prop bets. To get both the Whale Capper and the JJ podcast, make sure you search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, the Google Play Store. You can find us there. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please feel free to give us a rating and review as well, because those do help us out a ton. Dr. Eric Eager, you can find him on Twitter at PFF_Eric. He is a data scientist for Pro Football Focus and the co-host of the PFF Forecast podcast. We're going to preview Super Bowl 54 with him from Miami right now.
Covering the present.
Let's bring Dr. Eric Eager back into Covering the Spread once again to break down Super Bowl 54, and he is coming to us from Miami. Eric, how are things going down there at the site of Super Bowl 54?
Well, it's, living in Cincinnati, growing up in Minnesota, it's never this warm there, right? So it's warm. There's people everywhere. It's a little overwhelming, but it's a lot of fun. I think I told you guys I walked by Barry Sanders on the way here, and interestingly, I was a huge Stan growing up, and then I found out that running backs don't matter. So it's a little conflicting morally for me. But it's a lot of fun.
What did Barry say when you told him that running backs don't matter?
Well, I didn't actually say hi to him. Otherwise, he still looks like he could play a little bit. So I didn't want to, infuse anything.
I remember my brush with that was when the Vikings drafted Adrian Peterson. I was like, I think I was either in middle school or early high school, and I texted my dad, and I was like, I'm going to watch every Vikings game now, because I wasn't a Vikings fan, but and now I'm like, oh, that actually didn't matter. He's a pretty good player, but, didn't matter all that much. But, I mean, it's pretty cool you're down there. What's the atmosphere been like the first couple of days?
It's been great, and I think one of the cool things, so we have 4, 5, 6 people down here giving interviews and doing stuff, and we used to be a group that was, met with a lot of skepticism. Analytics met with a lot of skepticism, and now people do want to hear about, how, Kyle Shanahan, runs his offense and how he does it optimally, and Pat Mahomes, Andy Reid, and even the Ravens, right? Even though they lost in the divisional round, like why are they like now going to be a mainstay at the elite part of the AFC? And so like it's just fun because the league is evolving to the point where somebody, people like us are welcome down here, and we can chat with people about the game. And our perspective is valued.
And I don't want to out you here, but I think you're pretty public about the fact you're a Chiefs fan, and we can mention that here, I think, because we know you're a good enough analyst to analyze things objectively. But as a Chiefs fan, it's been a while. Obviously, 50 years since they've been to the Super Bowl. So does that kind of change the experience for you, knowing that you're going to get to see your team in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I went to the AFC title game 2 weeks ago, and the funniest thing is, I went as a part of a radio station I do hits for, and the people in the booth, I'm 34 years old. I've only really been a Chiefs fan for 10 years or so.
Yeah.
So I don't have the scars that these folks have, but the amount of time that people just said finally, they were tense. I met a guy who was a radio show host at a different station. He's like, "Hey, sorry I didn't get to say hi to you at the game. I was just so nervous the whole time." And I was like, being working in football, being a fan, but being a little bit detached, you don't necessarily get as much of that, right? And so for me, I was more nervous about the AFC title game than I am about this game. I think if they lose to the 49ers, they would have been beaten by a viable opponent. But it is it adds a little bit of fun to it for sure.
Absolutely. So, Eric, let's get into the game. Patrick Mahomes has looked awesome this season, especially in the postseason. And what is your take on whether the 49ers defense can keep him in check?
Well, in this game is going to be about who can get 2 or 3 stops. It's not going to be about shutting down the other team. And so, from that perspective, I think the only team in the NFL this postseason that's been able to stop Kansas City has been themselves. Maybe we've seen the 2 drops early in the game. Against Houston last week, they had the Kelsey drop on the first drive, and then the drop by Tyreek Hill on the first drive of the second half. Most of the time their receivers are getting open. Most of the time Mahomes, he didn't have a negatively graded throw last week. He has only 4% of his throws are negatively graded postseason. So, the Niners are going to have to do quite a bit and hope the Chiefs stop being so efficient offensively in order for them to if they only score in the late, low 20s, I do think they win 49ers. So, how do you get those 3-4 stops you need? I think that they're going to have to cover on the back end and then make Mahomes hold on to it a little longer. And then the pass rushers have to be disciplined. Houston's pass rushers and Tennessee's weren't, and we saw Mahomes make plays with his leg as a result.
So you said 4% negatively graded throws. What's the context on that? What's league average for that number if he's at 4%?
It's 15% across the league here. And Mahomes, when he spent the first probably 10 weeks of the year hurt, he was at about 15%. So his floor is basically league average in terms of limiting negative plays. And then since then, he's been, I believe it's 8% since their bye week. So he's just been, really efficient, just being accurate, right? And the thing out of Texas Tech for him was always he was a gunslinger, Brett Favre, all that kind of stuff, would miss as many throws as he made. And to probably Andy Reid's credit, that simply hasn't been the case. Last season, he was at 9% negatively graded throws, or 9.5%, and then this year he finished somewhere around 11 or 12 over the whole course of the season. So he's just a very efficient football player in terms of getting the ball in his playmakers' hands.
So, Eric, I want to ask you about maybe what exactly Andy Reid does. I saw your tweet about his less negatively graded throws. I've done some work. Basically, Andy Reid's team's interception rate have been below average all but 3 of his 21 seasons. That. All of them happened in Philadelphia. Hasn't had a season above the NFL pick rate in Kansas City. Any sense for what Andy Reid is doing?
Yeah, and you get the offshoots of that are great, right? Because the Chiefs defense, for example, has not been a talented group for 3-4 years. And they're still winning 60-70% of the games. And so I went back and looked at starting field position for an opponent, and Andy Reid has been better than all but one team over the past few years, and that's New England. So
Right.
That not throwing interceptions is just one of many things he does to put the rest of his team in a position to succeed even when they're weak. And that to me is like Andy Reid. Andy Reid, when you win 65, 70% of your starts with Alex Smith, you're just putting him in a position to succeed. And the thing that I wanted, like the thing about Reid to me that demonstrates his brilliance more than anything was in 2016, they were 12-4, they were a 2 seed in the AFC. Alex Smith, other than Sam Bradford, are the lowest average depth of target in the league. They knew they had to be more explosive on offense. So they go and draft Patrick Mahomes with the 10th overall pick. They used 3 picks to go up and get him. And sat him his first year. But instead of playing Alex Smith's offense, he prepared a new offense for Patrick Mahomes with Alex Smith. Alex Smith's average depth of target his last year in Kansas City was a half a yard bigger than the previous season. He won the passer rating title. So, to me, he's not only been grooming this position for Patrick Mahomes while he's been in the league, but he groomed it for him when he was having him sit on the bench for a year. And it's just, to me, just terrific foresight, terrific, just creating an environment for Mahomes, who has all the gifts in the world, but wasn't as productive at Texas Tech as some of these other quarterbacks, and we've seen the results.
Yeah, and I think the incredible thing about that Alex Smith offense was that he was so efficient on deep balls, and it's not even like he was never that talented in throwing deep, but all of a sudden once he gets Andy Reid, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce, the efficiency is there too, and it was just kind of. It showed you the upside of that offense if you were able to get someone who objectively had better talent in there, and that's exactly what they've done.
Absolutely, and you've even looked at how this has evolved. If we look at the San Francisco offense, they're very similar in the passing game. They're very similar to what the Chiefs were during the early Smith years, where Kelsey's leading the league in yak for a tight end. Tyreek Hill's a low A-dot player, just like Deebo Samuel has been. And then you look at and then you look at the low A-dot of Jimmy Garoppolo. He's the lowest in the league. Smith was second lowest in 2016. So it's a really fun parallel there. Reid has evolved his offense away from what San Francisco is doing in the passing game, whereas Shanahan, with Garoppolo, kind of an Alex Smithian type player. I think he's a little bit, maybe has more potential, but succeeding just the way that Reid did with Smith.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the parallels between both teams for a lot of different factors for this week. Now let's talk about the other side of the ball here, because the Chiefs able to put the clamps on Derrick Henry in the AFC Championship, but Kyle Shanahan's schemes in the running game are next level from pretty much anyone. So do you think this 49ers ground game will continue to be as successful as it was those first 2 postseason games, or can the Chiefs kind of turn the tides here a bit?
Yeah, so the Niners running game is 14th this year in success rate, which I think a lot of us will pull back and say, oh, that seems kind of low. I mean, they're a very good run team. And that's I think the point to beating them. They're explosive. They're 6th in EPA per run play, but they're 14th in success rate, which means they get stopped on first and second down relatively frequently for a team that's as efficient as they are running the football. That has to be it for the Chiefs. And the thing, that Kansas City has done so well to improve themselves is they tackle better, right? So, both of these defenses are lower in the league standings in success rate than they are in EPA allowed, which means, again, they're giving up some successful plays that don't turn into big plays. And I think for Kansas City to succeed both in pass defense and in run defense, they have to kind of do that. They have to tackle. Derrick Henry had a decent number of 4-yard gains against them. He didn't have that many 15-yard gains against them. And that, I think, really helped them sort of maintain, efficiency on defense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you also wrote this week about the improvement in the Chiefs' pass defense. When Jimmy G does have to air it out, who do you think has the edge there?
Well, I think the 49ers still do, obviously, with scheme and with talent. Great. So you take Kittle, and you take Matthew, 2 elite players of their position. I always think when that matchup happens, the offensive player has an advantage. So, in that matchup, it's probably going to be George Kittle getting his. And, Deebo Samuel's, pretty good. And while the Chiefs secondary, I think, is really good as a unit, they're not as talented player for player. So, I think they're improved. And the name of the game, and again, this is always fun because we think about historic Super Bowl defenses about being a shutdown defense. The goal for the Chiefs on Sunday is to get 2 or 3 stops. That's it. That's all they have to do. And we saw that in the Tennessee game. They score to go down 17-14. Tennessee runs the ball on first down, gets stopped for a yard, runs the ball on second down, gets stopped for a yard, and then Tennessee goes in the prevent and runs a screen, and the game's over, I think, by that time, right? Once Mahomes got the ball, and a score would put them in the lead, And that to me is the thing. So, make Garoppolo play from long yardage situations, force, inefficient first and second downs, and then cover and tackle, right? Cover and tackle, low A-dot plays on third and long. As long as you tackle, you're going to get a stop or two.
Excellent. And then also, do you think the Chiefs defense is going to miss Juan Thornhill? I've been looking at his cover grades all week.
They're good.
Yeah, and they're very good for Thornhill. Sorensen's come in a little bit. It looks like a little bit of a downgrade according to the scouting of you guys. Does that open up any opportunities for the Niners?
Absolutely. But one thing that Spagnuolo's done a great job with, when they signed Matthew, he was going to be their deep safety, like a Earl Thomas type. And, traditionally in his career, he's played in the slot, Houston and also Arizona. And so, Kendall Fuller was playing the slot. He was the main piece of the Alex Smith trade. Since Fuller's come back from injury, he's played in the deep safety role. Sorensen's kind of played down in the box, and then Matthew has played in the slot. So they've sort of moved around the chairs a little bit to where it's not a direct Sorensen for Thornhill replacement. Sorensen was already playing a lot as a linebacker in the dime and things like that in nickel. And so, he's kind of still playing that role. It's Kendall Fuller, who's a converted corner, playing that deep position. I think he's done a pretty good job at it.
It's really impressive to change your scheme on the run, which is kind of what they've done, because Thornhill was down late in the year. And to be able to change that as you're making a playoff run is pretty wild. And I think it says a lot about Steve Spagnuolo. And I think that, we kind of glossed over that move in the offseason because, they kind of had to make the change after what happened in the AC Championship game. But it has made a major difference, and I feel like we've kind of overlooked it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the last AFC Championship game, the Patriots were able to throw the ball in 2.23 seconds per throw, and all of their first reads, more or less, were available to them. And now, the Chiefs not only force quarterbacks to their second read relatively frequently, but they're a top 10 team in the NFL in terms of expected points added on the first read. So they're simply just covering that first look that the other quarterback has better than they did a season ago. And it's crazy because their personnel, other than Matthew and Thornhill, have not been. I mean, Bashad Breeland's a replacement level corner, and Charvarius Ward was an undrafted player that they were able to acquire from Dallas a season ago, and he played in the AFC title game as a starter. So it's really sort of a fun look at sort of how much the coordinator matters in defense.
Absolutely. Now, Eric, you're down there in Miami. You've been talking a lot, I'm sure, throughout this week and talking about a lot of different players. And you've been talking to different media members, like us, who are asking you questions. Who is one player not getting enough talk right now who has the potential to really skew things here from a betting perspective?
From a betting perspective, that's great. So to me, it's who that tertiary Chiefs receiver is, because I think the sharp play, when you're looking at totals, is to stay away from Kelsey, stay away from Hill, because every single game it's one or two. So you look at the passing map for Mahomes in the Houston game, and it was all Kelsey in that middle strip, that 10-19, and then he almost completely avoided that against Tennessee. He went deep to Watkins, he went underneath to everybody else, and so it's sort of hard to. It's sort of like with a Patriots running back. It's sort of hard to know who they're going to incorporate. But if you look at the secondary, the Mecole Hardmans of the world, the Demarcus Robinsons of the world, and the Sammy Watkins of the world, there's I think some betting angles there that matter a lot. And to me, it all starts with Mecole Hardman. He outsnapped Demarcus Robinson last week, I believe for the first time in a while. Robinson's snaps have been going down. I think he's a good candidate for an over, Robinson an under. And then with Watkins, you just basically have to bite the bullet and bet his under every single game. Because there's going to be games like last week where you're just crap, he gets you, right? But then the other 10 out of every 15 games, he's going to go under that total by a country mile, right? So from the betting perspective, I think it's Hardman. I think he does chip away a little bit at the targets of those secondary receivers for Kansas City.
Yeah, Pro Football Focus had Hardman as running 22 routes last week, which is the most he has run this year in a game where Tyreek Hill was healthy. So I am very much interested in Mecole Hardman as well. That speed, too, is pretty lethal. So we've seen the total in this game kind of go up. It's 54.5 right now. It opened up at 52.5. It's been pretty steady at 54.5 for a while now. Yep. Do you think that number has moved too far, or do you think that upward movement is appropriate?
Yeah, I think our number for the game is 54.4. So it's basically been where it's had to be. So I've taken a few overs, specifically early on, right when the big market moves. the secondary markets are slower to move, right? So you can get the team, like the Kansas City Chiefs team total 27 was available on Sunday night, Monday morning at -110. Now it's 27.5, like -130, -140, right? So you look at some of those, you're like, those have moved quite drastically. I think if this thing gets to 56, it's with that being, it's hard to say in the NFL, but a key-ish number being, 8 touchdowns or so, then the under's in play. I think right now you just sort of leave it where it is. You think your stars that you got 52.5 earlier in the week, and you move on. But to me, I think it's actually in the right spot, because if you go through the game states, there's not a ton of game states where both teams score relatively few points.
Interesting. And how about the side? We have the Chiefs at -1.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. What's your number and any opinions on that?
Yeah, I have them basically -0.6. So if you're inclined to, obviously being a Chiefs fan, I don't know if I want to bet San Francisco, but I do think if you're going to, I do think San Francisco is maybe a little bit undervalued. At the same time, like it's basically a pick the winner situation. I've looked back at a few other Super Bowls last year. I mean, this is you get some dead numbers, right? And they're sort of enticing you just to kind of, they're enticing you into bad bets at this point because of the wisdom of the crowds and everything. So basically, if you look at this number, it's sort of irrelevant. You just pick who you think will win, and generally speaking, that will be the right side.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a pretty fun game. Any other numbers that stand out to you? We got a lot of markets tender for the Super Bowl. Any ones that stand out to you as being profitable?
Yeah, so we put out a few this week. So I like the Watkins unders. I think Watkins, if you can get him, like I saw somewhere, I think it was this Superbook had him as under 4.5 receptions. I think that's a pretty good play. These vary so much, but if you can get Watkins under, let's say 67.5 is I think where his yardage total was. I think at FanDuel it's maybe a little bit higher. But another one, a couple ones like, so this is specifically from you guys. I like, Deebo Samuel 54.5. That's probably an over if you like that. And then hold your nose and Mostert under 77.5, even though it's -124 where you guys are at. To me, I think like they want to be multiple at the running back position, and the sort of likelihood that they're going to give him all the carries again is pretty low.
Yeah, we had J.J. Zacharyson on yesterday to talk about props, and he also said Mostert under 77.5. It seems like Coleman's trending towards playing, and they've never really given one dude all the carries when they've had a full complement of guys. So it seems to bode well for Mostert under, especially if you think that the Chiefs wind up putting up a pretty good number. Yeah. It's harder to see Mostert hitting that number.
Well, so the tricky part is that Burita had the fumble issues late in the season and against the Vikings. So if he and Mostert were the only two available backs, there is a chance that he would just go straight with Mostert just because of a lack of trust. But historically, he's always wanted to play two backs, even all the way back to the Atlanta days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, that is Dr. Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus. You can find his podcast as well, PFF Forecast, all the good stuff from down in Miami. Eric, want to thank you for carving out some time for us during, I'm sure, what is a busy week. We really do appreciate it. Good luck. Enjoy the game, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. This is a fun podcast to follow along with all season. You guys have done a great job.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We appreciate it. Have fun.
See you guys.
Covering the future.
One final big thank you to Dr. Eric Eager for swinging by for today. Again, find him on Twitter at PFF_Eric, and make sure you check out his podcast, the PFF Forecast Podcast. And if you're looking to place a bet on the big game but aren't sure which team will win yet, FanDuel has you covered. Simply place a bet of at least $25 on an anytime touchdown scorer prop for the big game and receive a $1 bonus in site credit for every point scored by your player's selected team up to $25. It is that easy. For more details, visit sportsbook.fanduel.com. Must be 21 years old. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. And one thing that Eric touched on there, Ed, was Raheem Mostert and the under on his rushing prop at 77.5. That's something that JJ talked about yesterday, and just kind of exploiting recency bias. And you're not going to find much more recency bias than on a guy who just went off for 4 touchdowns and like 200 yards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really respect both JJ and Eric. And, I think when the Super Bowl is obviously a very public betting event, there's people that don't bet a lot that are going to come in and like, oh, hey, look what Mostert did last week.
Right.
And keep that number really high. And I think that's going to be related. Actually, I don't think. I know that's going to be related to what I'm going to talk about in covering the future as well.
Okay.
You got to remember, it's a really public betting event, the Super Bowl, and it's good to fade the public and people who just get too excited about things.
That makes me very nervous because I bet the Chiefs and the public money is on the Chiefs. So we will see. We'll see how that one goes. We'll get to the cover in the future in just 1 second. But first, FanDuel continues to give you more ways to win, this time with its big game props pick'em contest. Log into your FanDuel or FanDuel Sportsbook account and answer 15 questions on the Chiefs match with the 49ers. And if you get at least 12 questions right, you will earn $100. But if you get all 15 questions correct, you'll earn $15,000. And the best part is, it's completely free to play. Seriously. To enter, visit FanDuel.com or sportsbook.fanduel.com. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move now into covering the future. And Ed, you said you wanted to exploit the public when it comes to an event like this that is very heavily bet on by the public. Where do you find an edge when you're looking at the props available for Super Bowl 54?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the idea is you want to fade the public. The public's going to be excited. They're going to bet things like the over. They're going to bet, over like yards and just for things to happen. And as Gil Alexander likes to say, when you're going like taking an under, you're betting against humanity. And essentially, you're kind of betting against humanity here. And Rufus Peabody has talked about this a lot. He's big on betting Super Bowl props, and he every year is cheering for the most boring game possible. So essentially, just what we got last year.
Yeah.
You can kind of hear him counting his money last year as like the defenses of the Rams and the Patriots were dominating that game. So, anyways, I wanted to put a little data behind one of them. Let's just look at safeties. So safeties are pretty random, pretty rare as they come into games. When you look at the data over the last 5 regular seasons, there's been about 15.6 safeties on average per season. And so when you work that out per game, that means there's about a 6% chance for a safety in a game. And it probably could be less because there's a possibility that 2 of those safeties could happen in a single game. So that essentially means that there's about at least a 94% chance that there's no safety in this game. So this is something that you should look for. That's the number that data says over the last 5 regular seasons. You don't want to bet this at a sharp book like FanDuel because I think it was minus 2,200. And if you work out the math, there's no value in there. But if you can get a lower number, betting against the safety is something that you might be interested in. I'm almost certain that a sharp like Rufus Peabody is making these types of bets as well. So that's the number driven by the data. I also talked about, using data and numbers where randomness is really the primary driving force. The counterexample is like, whether the first play is going to be a run or a pass. There's less randomness in that, right? Because that's something in the mind of a coach based on personnel or whatever he's looking at. Safety, no one's scheming for a safety, right? It has to be a confluence of factors. So I do think this is something that randomness is going to play a role. The number is there's probably about 94% chance or more that there's no safety, and use that to look at your sports book or shop around for the safety prop.
What would the number need to be for you to bet on there being a safety? If there happened to be a book that was a little more frisky with the safeties, would you need that to be closer to like 7 or 8% for you to find value in it, or would these 2 offenses push you away?
I mean, I'm betting against humanity, Jim. So I'm gonna go with a no. I mean, obviously there is a yes bet too. So
yeah.
But no, I mean, I think it's an example of just the way the betting works with the Super Bowl and what sharps are taking. Just like JJ and Eric Eager are telling us, go under Raheem Mostert, and there's very good reasons for that. And
so
I think
you were talking about the value of rooting for a bad game. I am going to root for a good game here and go for the over on the Chiefs point total at 27.5 because I do like the spread here with the Chiefs laying 1.5, but you can get that a better number at some other books. There's also a pretty good amount of juice on 1.5. It's minus 115 right now. So the number I feel best about is the Chiefs getting over 27.5 points individually. Now, I should mention that there's pretty heavy juice here too. It's minus 122. So again, do some price shopping, see what number you can get. But this is my favorite market for this specific game it's a pretty fair number. It's a number I think the Chiefs should hit here because the big question with them is the matchup with the 49ers defense because they're the second best pass defense in football based on our metrics at Number Fire, and those were good numbers even though they played basically half the season without Quan Alexander and Dee Ford. But Patrick Mahomes this year was unreal against top-level competition. He had 3 games against top 10 pass defenses, small sample, but he added 0.34 passing net expected points per dropback, which is a full 1/10 of a point better than any other quarterback with at least 100 dropbacks in those scenarios. Matthew Stafford was second at 0.24. Mahomes was an outlier in the most positive sense. And 2 of those 3 games he played against top 10 pass defenses were on the road. One of them was against the Patriots, where he hurt his hand early in that game and still played pretty well throughout that one. Now it's a neutral site. Pretty tasty spot there for the Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs have failed to score at least 28 points in 9 games this year if you count the playoffs. Mahomes, though, didn't play in 2 of those games. 2 others were blowouts over the Bears, and I believe the Broncos was the other one, where the opponents scored just 3 total points. They didn't have to do much there, but the 49ers aren't going to score just 3 points. They're going to force the Chiefs to keep the foot on the pedal here, at least a little bit, and I would expect that the Chiefs should play pretty well there. If we look at the non-blowouts in which Mahomes played, they scored at least 28 points 10 out of 15 times, and given that I expect this game to be competitive, they're going to score points. And with how good Mahomes has been, even against good defenses, I expect them to get there. So again, I don't mind the spread. I think -1.5 is fair. I like it better at 1, obviously, but I think that that's an okay number. I feel a lot better about the over on their point total at 27.5. So if I had to pick one number to bet for Super Bowl 54, I would go with the over on that point total at 27.5, even though there is -122 on that over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Ed, you talked about the spread being fairly efficient yesterday. Any leans for you on the individual team totals? The 49ers are, I believe, at 26 right now. Any feel for you on either their total or the Chiefs total?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I think if any of them, I like Chiefs over their win total, and I think the idea is that the ceiling for the Chiefs offense is higher than the ceiling for the San Francisco's defense, and that's nothing against San Francisco's defense. They're a great unit. They proved it all year. Patrick Mahomes hasn't just been great recently. He's been great over 2 years as a starter, and they got a lot of guys healthy, and on many parts of that offense, he's got a lot of weapons. There's a lot of speed, and they do simple things like throw a lot on first down. So of any of those, I think I would go with that matchup.
If you want to bet the 49ers, their team total right now is 27 with -116 on the under. So a little bit higher, actually.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Also,
I think that number's. I think that over is a little bit interesting too.
Yeah.
A lot of respect for San Francisco's offense. They've been pretty good all year. Actually, better passing success rate than running success rate. Something Eric Eager talked about as well. And then you have the injuries on Kansas City's defense. Juan Thornhill won't be there, and Chris Jones is still dinged up, right?
Yeah, he was limited in practice last week, and I think to me that says he'll play. Right. But it might be a situation similar to that Titans game where he played but wasn't an every down player. And when he did play, he was super disruptive. But it's different when you're playing the 49ers, where the situations where you're going to want him in there are the early downs, where he can kind of bottle up Mostert. And those weren't the situations he was out there against the Titans. So I think if we get Chris Jones to the Titans version of Chris Jones, it's a different situation than if we can get a full Chris Jones. There'll be more practice reports, I believe, today, Wednesday. So maybe monitor him and consider the 49ers if he's still limited in practice there.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. I mean, he's probably the best player in that defense.
Oh, yeah.
Or close to it. So and a guy.
Him or Matthew. It's one of those two.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Clark's pretty good too, but Chris Jones is going to be on the interior a little bit more, trying to disrupt the running game as well as rushing the passer. So
yeah, and like we talked about yesterday, if there is a quote unquote weakness of the 49ers offense, it is their interior offensive line play. So Chris Jones, a pretty major factor and a guy to keep an eye on here. That is all we have for Super Bowl 54. Ed, it's been a pleasure breaking things down for you, and I'm excited to not talk about it anymore and just sit back and enjoy some football.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is my last show of the week. So
yeah, me too. It's very freeing to have my final podcast on a Wednesday. Like, what am I supposed to do Thursday, Friday? I guess we'll see. But you just released a new episode of the Football Analytics Show with Nick Costos. That's awesome.
Yeah, had Nick on. It was a fun conversation. We talked about analytics and betting and fantasy football. We talked about Super Bowl. We talked about a lot of things that were not Super Bowl as well. Food, books. Nick's a fun guy. He's got a lot of opinions and was really fun to talk to. So check it out at the Football Analytics Show.
That's awesome. I need to give that a listen because Nick I've interacted with him a couple of times, being on You Bet or You Bet, and then having him on this podcast, and just a fun person to listen to talk. Like, I could give him a microphone and let him just kind of go for an hour and see what comes out, and I think I would listen to that personally. So a guided conversation would be pretty good too. What else do you have over at the Power Rank?
Well, I keep finding mistakes in my Super Bowl preview. So
hey, that's why we have the longer shelf life, man. It's time to make edits. You're good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the one I really made was that I missed that Juan Thornhill was hurt until we had talked yesterday. And then I also keep saying that Patrick Mahomes' rookie year was last season, which Eager pointed out is not true. That was his first year as a starter. So, anyways, I still think the preview is really good. I looked at offensive tendencies, looked at some snap count data on defense to see how both defenses will approach the game. And looked at turnovers and things I mentioned about Andy Reid and his interception rate since he's been a head coach, which I think is fascinating. So you can get that at thepowerrank.com. I
was looking through a piece I wrote for Number Fire in, I think, like 2013 or 2014, a couple weeks ago, just for some reason. It was about Vance Worley being the opening day starter for the Twins, and I found a typo there. So it is never too late to find and correct a typo, because you bet I went in and made that change. Never too late. Make sure you find all of Ed's work over at thepowerrank.com. Find him on Twitter at thepowerrank, and check out the Football Analytics Show wherever you get your podcasts. As I mentioned yesterday, we do have a DFS show up as well for the single game slate for the Super Bowl with myself and Brandon Gaduli. You can find that by searching for the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. And of course, check out our podcast with JJ Zachariason, which went up yesterday, and our podcast with Whale Capper last week about the NBA. Breaking down all those things, you can get those by searching for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also find the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. As always, thank you, Callan. Thank you to Dr. Eric Eager, JJ Zachariason, and Whale Capper for helping us preview Super Bowl 54. Good luck to all of you as you place your bets for the big game on Sunday. Enjoy the game. Hopefully you are able to still enjoy it even with all the money on the line, and we'll talk to you again soon. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.